Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. Would everyone please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag is here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you would remain standing for one moment of silence from what happened yesterday in Broward County, our hearts go out to the families and to those we lost. If we just take 1 second of moment of silence. Thank you. You may be seated. I'm Dr. Tanja Williams, president of St. Petersburg College, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Seminole campus of St. Petersburg College. This is one of 12 distinct sites throughout our county that provides higher education, and we offer more than 100 degrees or certificate programs. We serve about 35,000 students, unduplicated headcount. We have 3,000 employees, of which 1,300 are actually faculty, full-time and adjunct. We offer certificates, associate in arts, associate in science, and baccalaureate degrees. As they say in the military, we've got you covered. And I proudly add that SPC is the higher education choice of 1,700 veteran students this academic year. I would like to recognize that special group of students now. If you're a veteran student of St. Petersburg College, if you would stand. They must be in class. Woo-hoo! Thank you so much for your service and for selecting St. Petersburg College as your educational institution. How about other veterans in the audience? If you are a veteran, would you please stand and be acknowledged? Woo! We so value you and your service in providing our civil liberties so that we can live this life in America and beyond. Thank you so much for the sacrifices you have made. And thank you to those who took the time to come and join us tonight. We are honored to have Deputy Secretary of the Veterans Administration, Tom Bowman, as our keynote speaker tonight. He's going to share his insights and strategies for what the VA should be pursuing to fulfill our promise to our veterans. I want to acknowledge the work of the SPC Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions in facilitating the arrangements for him to be here. In collaboration with the Veteran Services Coordinator, Mr. Jeff Kavanaugh, and our All-State Campus Provost, Dr. Scott Fronrath. Would the three of you stand, Dr. Kavanaugh, Mr. Kavanaugh, Dr. Fronrath, and David Clement, so we can acknowledge you for putting this together. Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like to call David to the stage to introduce our moderator who will bring on the keynote speaker and get the program underway. Thank you again for coming to St. Petersburg College's Seminole campus.
Thank you, President Williams, and let me add my welcome to you, guests, veterans, and a special welcome to any elected officials in the audience. I know there's one I recognize from sight in the front row, Seminole Mayor Waters. Thank you. Thank you for your public service, all you elected officials. Our moderator is a familiar name to many of you. He has long been a friend and advocate for veterans. I've known him about 4 years now, and I have found him to be a passionate advocate not only for veterans, but for all citizens. He does his homework when he speaks. It's from a base of knowledge and experience and the rule of law. He is a former congressman who represented this district, District 13, in Central Pinellas from 2014 to 2017. And before that, he was an advisor to the late Congressman C.W. Bill Young, who, as many of us know, fought for veterans' interests for every one of his 42 years in service. Please welcome to the stage the Honorable David Jolly.
Hey, thank you all very much. Is this a great night or what? Yeah? That was when I first got elected. You can see what Congress does to you, actually. I want to say thank you to each one of you all who have come out tonight for a very important event. Obviously, to thank our host, St. Petersburg College, to thank Dr. Williams for her leadership of the college. In just a short tenure, we have seen the energy that she brings to this college, the commitment. And part of that commitment is to be a remarkable institution for students who have served in our armed forces. To have 1,700 active students who are veterans is a remarkable legacy for this institution, and it is a remarkable contribution that this institution gives back. So I want to say thank you to St. Petersburg College, to each one of you who have served, those who may be students, but those also who are not students tonight, thankfully. And I also want to share with you, and I know you know this because you wouldn't be here otherwise, but to have the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department is a real pleasure and a real honor for us. And so I want to make sure we have as much time tonight to hear from him, to hear from our panelists, to allow for questions. And so my only job for the rest of the evening is to keep us on time so the smart people can talk as much time as they have to share with us. As you came in, you were provided index cards, 3x5 index cards. That is the way we will be handling questions following the initial remarks. The questions, if you have a question, it will not be coming direct from the audience. You will need to complete one of those 3x5 cards. Please write it legibly to make sure we can read it. If it is directed for the entire panel, you can do that. If you specifically want it directed for one specific person, obviously just note that on the card. If you do not have an index card yet and would like one, just kind of raise your hand at any point this evening and we'll make sure that we have an index card brought over to you. But with that, let me introduce our featured speaker this evening. Our featured speaker was nominated by President Donald Trump to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs and was confirmed by the United States Senate on August 3rd, 2017. Prior to that, he had served at VA nearly 10 years between 2002 and 2012, including assignment as Chief of Staff to 2 previous VA secretaries. The son of a career Navy chief and enlisted pilot, Mr. Bowman served 30 years in the Marine Corps as an infantry and judge advocate officer, including 21 years on active duty. He retired as a colonel in October 1999 after serving as senior military assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. He holds a law degree from Western New England College School of Law in Springfield, Massachusetts. I hope not a Patriots fan. And a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Texas at Austin. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the Honorable Thomas G. Bowman, Deputy Secretary of the VA.
It's a real pleasure to be here, but as soon as I started walking across, I saw this chair behind me, and I was wondering whether this is supposed to be an easy event or a rather hard one. So I won't use the chair. Before I begin, I feel compelled because I feel that I do have some investment in this community because I worked here for 3.5 years. And I have some old colleagues out here that I would like to recognize specifically, but I'd like to thank David for his introduction and David Clement for all of the work that he did to make this happen. A special thanks, I believe, is for Dr. Fronrath also, because this event would not have even come to pass without his initial idea saying, Tom, would you consider coming to St. Pete College to talk with not only faculty but students and the community? And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. So from that, it gave rise to a lot of coordination since last September. So I think his persistence and the willingness of St. Pete College to have me come and attend and to speak on behalf of not only the president, but also Dr. Shulkin, who is the secretary. I think the title of the event is really apropos, Fulfilling the Promise, because we are now 1 year into the administration and then 1 year into Dr. Shulkin's tenure as the secretary. And there has been a lot of change since the inaugural as it relates to veterans events. I have a bunch of notes here, but you know, I was writing over and I was thinking, how should I really approach this? And what I want to do is to kind of throw my notes off to the side, pick up some of the highlights, and speak from the heart as to the issues that I see that veterans not only are experiencing and what VA is attempting to do to handle some of the challenges, and then hopefully through the panel discussion see what your thoughts are on where we are doing a good job, where we need to do better, and I can take those back and we can hopefully be able to integrate them. One of the first issues that I think everybody is aware of is the whole issue of the health care legislation that is ongoing in Washington, the CARE legislation. And where we are right now, the Congress has legislation from the committee on the Senate side that hopefully will be able to be seen being voted on in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, this is just a guess because you can never pin Congress down as to its intent for any legislation. But there is a piece of legislation over there on the Senate side that looks at how we're going to consolidate care, 7 funding streams down to 1, so the secretary and medical center directors will have flexibility in how they spend their funding. It is going to take a look at expanding access to care for veterans as they begin to want to have care out in the community, but having it done in such a way that it's affordable and that it is clinically sound. There have been some contentions that the focus is there's going to be privatization of VA healthcare, and I'm going to tell you right now that is on nobody's chart in this administration. There will not be a privatization of VA or VA healthcare. You can take that to the bank. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be changes. There will be changes. So now most of our veterans have been experiencing the choice program. Some are satisfied with it, some aren't. But what we are looking at in this new legislation is under the choice program right now, nationally, there are about 770,000 veterans who would qualify in the 30-day, 40-mile rubric of how people can be identified as eligible for the choice program. Under legislation that has been proposed in the Senate, 9 million veterans would become qualified for the program. I seem to think that that is an expansion of choice, not a constriction of choice. But it's not going to be, you got a card, you can go anywhere you want. Because VA would not be able to somehow project a budget and determine how many veterans are actually going to use it. So there is some constraints as to coordination of that care, clinical care, with the VA. So a VA medical center like Bay Pines, where I get my health care. I get my health care here. My medical center director met me when I arrived, and first thing she asked me is, have you gotten your flu shot? And I said, well, I think so. She says, well, I'll have a nurse over here pretty soon. I said, no, I'm okay. But I do get all my health care here. So that legislation that is in the Senate right now was passed out of committee 14-1, and hopefully it'll be on the floor within 2 to 3 weeks. If that occurs, then the Senate has passed their piece of legislation. The House will take up theirs. We're still looking at what it may ultimately look like. So the House takes up their legislation, they pass it, and then it goes to a conference committee, and that is where law ultimately is made, when it gets to conference. Because the House version and the Senate version will be looked at, and then some legislation will come out. It'll go back to House and Senate for votes, and if approved, then it goes to the President's desk. I can tell you that the legislation that comes out of the conference will be one that will move quickly, because in the minds of a lot of, I'd say most veterans, even me, this has taken too long. This should have been done in the fall. But for reasons that that some people believe needed to delay it to make sure that there was a full consideration of options and aspects, it was delayed. But the longer it's delayed, there are more funds that are going to have to be implemented just to keep the older legislation going. We're going to move to new health care for veterans, health care coordinated in the community, and there will be an expansion of care coordination in the community because VA can't do it all. I think that some people have the idea that only on the campus that veterans should be taken care of. That can't be. We don't have the capacity for all of our lines of care to do it on a VA campus. So we need to have a collaboration and coordination in the community. So that may be, a question we can have some question and answer, give a little more detail. But the point I want to leave you with is VA is not privatizing its health care simply because we're expanding care in the community. It's a way of doing a proper balance. The other aspect that has been on everybody's mind is the whole issue of appeals, and how are we handling addressing the backlog of 470,000 appeals. So essentially what we have is we have an individual, a veteran, who has filed a claim. It's gone through the regional office. There has been a determination as to whether or not there was a grant for certain conditions. And then if the veteran is dissatisfied, they appeal. There was legislation passed last year for appeals modernization. The essence of that legislation is to give the veteran more choice in how the appeal can be processed. There's going to be we are in the midst of a pilot program to help identify what might be the instincts of veterans between now and next February, when the pilot program will end and we will begin to see whether or not the legislation as it has been produced is going to be something that achieves its goal of quicker, timely, satisfying appeals processing. The program is called the RAMP program. And what it essentially does is, if a veteran has an appeal for a compensation-related claim, any condition where there has been an appeal, it could be one condition, it could be 5. But then that veteran is going to be offered the opportunity to have the appeal considered in 2 lanes. One lane would be if the veteran doesn't believe that he has any more need for any more evidence to make his case, they will take it. And they'll move it through as quickly as they can, sometimes within, the goal would be 125 days. But right now, since we're in the pilot, some of these claims that we have processed under the new appeal plan, what they do is they're being decided within 30 days, 35 days. The numbers aren't that great because the RAMP program is just getting started. We have about 155 letters that have been sent out to certain veterans. Those who have been waiting the longest have been offered an opportunity to join the program. One of the things that I have interjected into the discussion is we need to open it up more than just to individuals that may or may not have a lengthy claim, because right now we're not seeing enough veterans indicate an interest in trying to process their claim in a more timely way. The second venue is going to be where a veteran does have some more evidence that they want considered, but they want it considered in an expeditious way. We can have the regional office director up here as part of the give and take of question and answers. The reason I'm bringing the ramp up is you all know individuals in the community, veterans, whether they're associated with veteran service organizations or not. One of the things that I am asking you to do is to ask that veteran if they have an appeal, they're waiting on an appeal, to consider the RAMP program. And the information can be provided through the regional office. So if they want an expeditious processing of their claim and not waiting for it to be considered in the normal cycle, I would encourage the individuals to consider the RAMP program. I would also strongly encourage that it be done with the assistance of a veteran service organization advisor or representative, because they will understand whether or not, if you want to use the evidence route, whether the evidence is appropriate, whether it's complete, or if you don't need the evidence. So I would offer that is one of the changes that has come about as a result of the legislation. The third piece of legislation that is out there is the accountability and whistleblower protection. And that, the purpose behind that legislation was to take a look at how an individual who is the subject of either poor performance or misconduct, just not doing their job, how that individual, employees within the VA, both executive as well as staff, can be processed more expeditiously out of the VA. Now, it's not meant to deprive anybody of due process, but it is also meant to also see that there is a more expeditious adjudication of these claims. Right now, I think our experience is it's working, trying to balance due process with the need for an expeditious determination. One of the things that I think I saw when I was here at the VISN level is that an employee who is failing to perform is forcing another employee, a colleague, to pick up the slack. And that's just not right. So the legislation was meant to take care of that with an expeditious processing. The next area that I'd like to kind of move into is, as we look at VA going into the future, one of the biggest things that we have as it relates to care is the whole issue of medical records. And many of you are aware that the Secretary made a decision to have VA's healthcare records be able to be integrated with DoD healthcare records. So he he made a decision that he was going to award a contract to the Cerner Corporation, which now handles DoD records. They've done it for about 4.5 years. So what we're going to do is, as soon as the contract is signed, which is hopefully going to be very, very soon, you're going to see a process where at the end of the day, you're going to have a healthcare record that'll go from DoD to VA. There will not be any interruption. Now, it's not going to be fast. It's easy to combine or to see a segue of DoD to VA. But what about care in the community, where a doctor who has provided care under the new CARE program or those under the old CHOICE program, what about their records? Part of the Cerner implementation is going to be able to integrate those records into VA healthcare. Now, the reason for that is important is it is a bedrock promise of the American people that veterans are going to be taken care of. Their health care is an obligation of the nation to take care of those who have served. We're looking at having care in the community. The VA has an obligation to make sure that they have as much of a complete record as possible so they can be held accountable and be able to plan and implement the amount of funding that Congress is going to be required to provide for us to take care of these veterans. So you're going to see, hopefully very soon, an announcement of a contract, and that contract is significant. It's going to take VA, DOD, veterans, healthcare into the future, and when it ultimately works, it becomes the template for the rest of the country in private healthcare. Now, some people say it's a gamble. Sure, it's a gamble, but I think it's a gamble that has been well thought out, well researched, and now, hopefully, when the budget is ultimately passed, it is going to be appropriately funded. We expect that to occur. The next thing that I'd like to address is a significant issue, not only to VA and veterans, but to the nation at large, and that is suicide. Veteran suicide. Right now, our best estimates based upon data and analysis is that 20 veterans a day commit suicide. So if 20 veterans a day commit suicide, also our research has indicated that 6 of them are somehow related to being treated within our system. 14 have not interacted with VA healthcare. We have to do a better job of reaching out, not only by VA, but also by community. The community members, community organizations, churches, we look to any organization to help us identify veterans who should be being treated and cared for within VA. Now we have, 16, 17 years of engagement overseas. We have our young people coming back, many of them with mental health challenges. We have to do a better job in reaching out, bringing them in. The largest piece of our budget increase has to do with mental health for the coming year, 18 and 19, those budget years, because there has been a determination that that is where we need to produce that amount. We're hiring over 1,000 new mental health professionals to come into VA and help us. Now, what's the challenge there? The private sector needs mental health providers also. So what VA is going to have to do is to align itself with private providers in the community, but also bring those providers into VA by taking a better look at how we make it attractive for these professionals to come in. And that is one of Secretary Shulkin's goals, is to take a hard look at the recruitment, the hiring, and the onboarding process to bring healthcare professionals in. He also says, even though that is a principal focus, it is his major clinical issue that he wants to address. We do have those same problems in the Veterans Benefit Administration. We want to bring people in who are going to stay, who want to come to VA. Now, the Secretary has identified his 5 priorities as we see them up there. A greater choice, we've talked a little bit about that. Modernizing systems, the idea behind that is the new integration of the healthcare record. Focusing resources. Where are the greatest needs for veterans in their benefits or their healthcare? And part of his focus is going to be identifying where those needs are, and then making sure that there are appropriate funds dedicated. Improving timeliness, the issue there is we can't have people waiting for health care. We can't have individuals who have filed claims waiting for those claims to be fully processed and then appeals adjudicated, because for a number of, I'd say many veterans, their ability to access the care is conditioned upon the resolution of their claim. That means there would be veterans who are being denied the care because they don't have an expeditious or a timely adjudication of their claim. And then suicide prevention is the Secretary's highest clinical priority. Let me address a question that has been presented to me in a number of other forums, the issue of homelessness. It's one of the tragedies, I think, that we are looking at veterans who find themselves in a situation of homelessness. Now, some veterans, in my experience here, when I was in Visit 8, but also as I travel around the country, some veterans are not coming to VA for the assistance that is provided for homelessness, the vouchers that we're able to give them to find housing, the health care and the counseling that we might be able to provide them, where they'll have a change in attitude about their desire to remain homeless. Some, and I would say an increasing number of veterans find themselves homeless because they believe that there is no alternative approach to helping them resolve their homeless condition, which simply isn't the case. We have, I think, about 15 to 18 billion dollars between VA, the Department of or HHS, and housing that have funds that are appropriate for the addressing of homelessness. I think that the addressing of homelessness is it's a combination of efforts, but it's a partnership between VA and the community. VA, I believe, is going to be reaching out more. The point that I've heard is under Secretary Shinseki and then also with Secretary McDonald, they had as one of their priorities homelessness. And Dr. Shulkin doesn't have homelessness as one of the priorities up there, and people took that to mean it's not a priority. That's not the case. That what he did is homelessness is still as much a priority, but the issue is the funding for that. He wanted to be able to have medical center directors and VISN directors have flexibility to take the funds that are available and address them where the needs are. So if there is a VISN or a medical center where the need for homeless funds and the needs are being addressed, but there's excess funding, move that over to where there's another need. It could be in mental health, it could be in veteran women's programs, but give the leadership of the medical center and the VISN an opportunity to make decisions and move the funds around. There is Danny, I'm going to advance up to the first video. This is a video that is going to be of significant interest. So we'll talk
in the fabric of America, they are the toughest threads, our bravest, and most selfless. They raised their hands, stepped forward, and served for each other, for you, and me. One of the first things they learned was the code that every service member lives by. Leave no one behind. Now all of us need to live by it too, because some veterans are being left behind. 20 of them take their own lives every day. Why? It's not simple. It never is. What matters is that we're there for them, just like they were there for us. A handshake, a phone call, a simple gesture make a big difference to a veteran in crisis. Learn how to be there for a veteran at BeThereForVeterans.com. Honor the code. Be there. Leave no one behind.
I think we can all recognize the voice as Tom Hanks. We have that up on our webpage, and it's also on a number of other web pages, but it really captures the whole essence of what do we need to do to help veterans. We need to be there for them, but we need to reach out and make sure that we become an echo chamber of what VA can do to help these veterans. There's another piece of legislation that was passed that's of great interest, I'm sure, to St. Pete College as well as all the other academic institutions, and that was the improvement of the Forever GI Bill. It expanded capabilities and access and support for Guard and Reserve. But the biggest thing that it did was remove the terminal date, that it is there as long as the veteran has a desire to use it and he hasn't or she hasn't used all their funds. Some people would say, well, that's a no-brainer. How come we haven't done it before? Well, as we all know, there are times when legislation is passed and there's only a certain amount of funding that is available for it. So it became an issue with the veteran service organizations, say that's just not right. Lives are different, challenges are different, we need to take the terminal date. Another thing that President Trump mentioned when he took office was that he was going to have a hotline, a White House hotline. How many here know what the hotline number is? But there is a White House hotline, and the purpose of it is a veteran or a veteran's family member can call it if they have a question. And I've heard it from any number of individuals. I know I've called the RO, but they put me on hold or I get passed down. I want to call somebody else. That was the motivation for the president when he said, well, I'll just have a hotline where they can call me and then be directed to the right people as opposed to having to go through a continuous menu of choices. 855-948-2311 is the White House hotline. It's operational. You call it, you're going to have a live voice on the other end, and 90% of the individuals who are participating in providing the response, they're veterans or they are family members of veterans. So the idea is they can understand. They understand what might be the basis of the problem. The last thing I'd like to bring up is on January 9th, President Trump signed a presidential executive order supporting veterans transitioning from uniformed service to veterans ranks. The goal is to have DoD and VA work hand in hand to facilitate a member's transfer once they decide to leave service or retire, to move over into veteran status. Their DoD and VA are working on a transition plan that is going to be able to demonstrate just exactly how DoD and VA are going to implement that. It's to be done in March. So when that joint DoD plan is finalized, it's going to be publicized, and I think what you're going to find is individuals who are currently on active duty, who are going to be moving into veteran status, they are going to be able to have, during their first year, the ability to access mental health care. What our research has demonstrated is many of our young people who leave active duty are in a most vulnerable period during that year. They leave a structured environment where they've been taken care of or they have assisted in other people taken care of. There's a satisfaction in that, and they get into an environment after they leave where they feel lost and they're vulnerable. So I think that when we ultimately have the plan as to how it's going to be implemented in both departments, what you'll see is I think an aggressive approach that will help address what has been a lingering problem of the transition of individuals from active duty into into a veteran status. The last thing I would like to do, I thought about it as I was flying down here. I'm going to find the number. Many of you, have cell phones, and what I'd like to do is to ask if you would take out your cell phone. If you have two of them, you can. The Veterans Crisis Line. Some people call that, the suicide crisis line. It's now, the way we address it is the Veterans Crisis Line. What I'd like to do is to ask you to go to your index and put in this number. This is the Veterans Crisis Line. It's 800-273-8255. And then you would press 1. And that's going to get you to a Veterans Crisis Counselor. The reason I'd like for you to have that in your phone is that you may not need it, but there may be somebody that you do know that will. And you'll have something very handy for immediate access. One of the things that I found in my time in Washington is that if that was available on the Hill, I know of 2 members of Congress who had that number available when an individual in their office, a constituent in their office, seemed to be in crisis, and they were able to use that phone to get a counselor on the line. 800-273-8255. What I'd like to do now is kind of close and then kind of move into our next area and then answer questions. But before I do, I want to thank you for being here. I think this community, this greater area of St. Pete, Seminole, all of the communities around here, I think it's a very veteran-friendly community. I rent a place down here. This is my home. When I ultimately retire, I'm going to be a veteran that Wally used to take care of. Every now and then he would tell me that I got to do a better job at complaining less about the health care that I was receiving while he was the director. But Wally, thank you for everything you've done for me. So again, I'd like to close thanking everybody. I think the purpose of the question and answer hopefully will fill in some blanks as it may relate to whatever I can answer, as well as the other members of the panel. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Clement. Okay.
Folks, let's hear for Secretary Bowman. Thank you. And thank you for introducing Wally Hopkins. Many in this room know Wally, but you certainly deserve recognition for your long service to VA and veterans as well. In addition to Secretary Bowman, we have several people to serve on a panel this evening, each bringing a slightly different perspective. Their bios are in your program, so I'm not going to read the full bio of each, but please join me in welcoming first to the stage Ms. Suzanne Klinker, Director of the Bay Pines VA Healthcare System. Following Suzanne, please welcome Dr. Alfonso Carino, Chief of Mental Health and Behavioral Sciences Services at Bay Pines VA Healthcare System. And Reverend Father Bob Swick, a former Marine captain and chaplain in civilian life, speaking from the perspective of a veterans advocate. Captain Darren Villa, Command Surgeon for Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base, speaking from the perspective of an active duty officer. And finally, someone who is not on your program, so I will give a brief introduction, and that is Lieutenant General Martin Steele, is a decorated Marine combat veteran who rose from private to 3-star general, culminating his 35-year military career as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans, Policies, and Operations at Headquarters, U.S. Marine Corps. Please welcome Lieutenant General Martin Steele. And Julie Bohr. And Julie Bohr is in the house as well. Please welcome Miss Julie Bohr. I do want to touch on, ask questions of the panelists on several things that the Secretary brought to light. I'll start with you, Ms. Klinker. Mr. Bowman spoke of the modernization within the VA, and modernization picks up in a lot of areas, specifically in electronic medical records and other systems that improve the delivery of care. Bay Pines is a place where probably many in this room perhaps receive care and have received care for a long time. Tell us, if you will, what they may have noticed in terms of modernization in recent years and perhaps what they should be looking for in the coming years.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Can you hear me all right? Great. Modernization is very important to us at Bay Pines, and it is visible on our campus. Most recently, we opened our Mental Health Edition, which brings together our outpatient, inpatient, and residential care for veterans in need of mental health care. It's a very respectful, healing environment, and I believe some of you may have been at our open house for that. If you'd like a tour of the facility and have not yet seen it, we'd really encourage you to come out and see it. At the front of our campus, when you come in the main gates, you may see some more construction, and that's our Cancer Infusion Center. That will bring together, at the front of our campus, our cancer care, right next to the Radiation Oncology Center. In fact, they'll be connected and have a portico out front for veterans to use in inclement weather. Bay Pines is the only VA medical center in the state of Florida that is accredited by the Commission on Cancer. That's how seriously we take responsiveness to care of cancer for our veterans. So we're excited about having that building open, be turned over to us later this year to be able to stand up. We are also in the final stretches of construction of a research edition so that we can continue honoring veterans through research and identification of high-quality outcomes and new care strategies. And that will be opening later this year as well. So we're excited about that. Thank you.
How about parking?
And parking. We have opened a parking garage if you've not been on
All right.
campus of recent. And there are many shuttles available. And we have a telephone number. I don't have it with me this evening, but there is a telephone number that you can put into your mobile device and just call from wherever you're at in a parking lot to be picked up and taken to your location.
Very good. Thank you, Suzanne. Dr. Carino, we saw the video of the profiles, particularly the plague, if you will, of veteran suicide and the current suicide rate. There's much more to mental health profiles and the mental health services provided to the VA than simply suicide prevention. And I think that the video is appropriately touches on the strength that members of the armed services carry with them throughout life, but perhaps sometimes hides some real challenges. How would you define kind of the diversity of cases you perhaps see, and what we each can be looking for among the veteran community that we might recognize as a cause for concern for somebody that might need help?
Excellent question. Well, let me start by saying the reason we focus on suicide is because that's the gravest complication of mental illness. As you know, 2,100 people commit suicide daily worldwide. 112 of them here in this nation, and 18% of those, or 20, as Mr. Bowman talked about, are veterans. Most of those are not veterans that are receiving care in VA. We're focusing on suicide because most of the suicides are preventable. And the reason they're preventable is because 90% of them are due to a mental health condition. That doesn't mean, and I'm a clinician, I'm not a politician, I'm a clinician, that doesn't mean that every suicide is preventable. As a doctor with 25 years of experience, as a psychiatrist, I can tell you that just like heart disease, some people will die from a heart attack, but many will be saved with the appropriate treatment. Same thing with mental illness, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, psychosis, and other mood disorders that are associated with suicide. You mentioned, what else do we see? We see a gamut, with the whole gamut of mental health conditions in the VA. Veterans the majority of veterans that have a mental health condition have post-traumatic stress disorder, followed by substance use disorder, mood disorders, as well as psychotic disorders. We not only provide effective treatments, but we try to assist veterans with the skills building so that they could have a quality of life in the community.
May I ask a follow-up on that in terms of how post-traumatic stress presents either similarly or differently depending on the generation? You know, post-traumatic stress is something that the nation became focused on after OIF and OEF, but the reality is we have generations of those who have served who have carried it. Does it present the same? Does it present differently?
The symptoms are the same. The difference is how the patient or the person expresses them and shares it with others. We had a lot of veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder for many years from the Vietnam era. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. Nowadays, with the OIF, OEF, and New Dawn veterans, we do see significant numbers of post-traumatic stress disorder. 13% of those veterans have PTSD. What we're seeing different, though, is that there's a greater portion of veterans with substance use disorder and PTSD that we weren't seeing in the past. So in veterans that have post-traumatic stress disorder, up to 46% of those with PTSD have substance use disorder. And if you treat or address one condition and not the other, you're not going to have good outcomes. As such, we have really strengthened our treatment programs in VA and Bay Pines to address patients with opioid use disorders and alcohol use disorders and treat them at the same time as we treat their PTSD. We used to think that by treating PTSD first, that everything else would normalize. We know better now. We know that the outcomes are better when we address both. And so effective treatments that we have now include the dual diagnosis integrated programs in PTSD, addressing both in those veterans, those 46% of veterans that have both diagnoses.
Very good. Thank you. Again, a reminder, if you have a question, now is a good time to begin to fill out the index card. Father Bob, I want to go to you next on the question of wait times that again captured some of the attention of the nation in recent years. You have served as a VA advocate, a veteran advocate, along with others that I see in the room tonight. We often heard people speak very proudly of the service they received at the VA during that national conversation. We also have seen changes as a result of choice and improvement and so forth. What's your perspective as a veterans advocate when it comes to either wait times or any other matter that you think defines the delivery of care at the VA?
I said at the outset that if I didn't understand the question or if I didn't know the answer, I'd say, let us pray. We got another hour and a half here. It's such a gamut, you know. I was taught early on in my life by our parents, all of us kids were, that God helps those that help themselves. And you have to take the initiative of yourself, and the more you do so and reach out to the veteran service offices that are there, either the county office itself or an adjunct to it through one of the veteran organizations, the VFW, the Purple Heart Society, et cetera, DAV, on and on. You get some very, very good, knowledgeable people that know how to navigate the system. And I do think that there's a fear, both in general, and I look at the fear of the bureaucracy facing it from a standpoint of the youth coming out and just being flabbergasted with everything. And then the older folks, my generation, the geezer group, you know, sit around and mope and complain, but are afraid to take that step. Having said that, I went 30-odd years suffering through PTSD, not knowing what it was because we weren't told anything about this kind of an illness until I came down here, and the Veteran Service Director at the time of the county refused to let me get out of his office until he enrolled me. And I went and combat wounded and what have you, I went from nothing to being 100% disabled and in total care of Bay Pines. I am the strongest advocate that there is for the quality of care. It covers the gamut. They're wonderful people. The commonality is that they care, My wife is not a veteran, so she has her own insurance company, and she goes to these doctors. And one of the biggest differences, and Deputy Secretary, I hope that we can recognize this too. In every VA clinical center that you go to or at the hospitals, you'll see in the waiting room, there's a sign that says, if you've been waiting longer than 15 minutes, come to the desk. I've never had to go to the desk. But you go to, my wife can go to the doctor and sit there for a half hour, you know? So it's, from a standpoint of advocacy, we want to help each other, but we have to take that initiative ourselves. And I'll tell you, my experience is that there are so many good advocates out in the community through our own veteran organizations. The Marine Corps League is certainly a good example of that. They're there, but again, God helps those that help themselves.
Juliana, on the benefits side, part of the Secretary's vision for modernization, some of the efforts already in terms of caseloads and backlogs and the investment in solving some of those problems. What is it that perhaps we should have noticed at the regional office, and what should we be looking for under the Secretary's new vision? What do you anticipate veterans seeing at the regional office?
So the modernization Mr. Bowman already mentioned was the appeals process. I think we've done a lot of transformation going from a paper environment into a digital environment. That digital environment allowed us to change our process to be more efficient through the national work queue, so that if a veteran in Florida comes in and we have capacity, we service them, but if we don't, they don't have to wait. It will go to one of the offices in the 56 regional offices throughout the country that can serve them that day. So we're doing a little bit better job utilizing technology and people and process through the claims process. Our timeliness has improved quite a bit in that area, although admittedly we still have a lot of work to do there. But I think the frustration in the community, in the veteran community, and within the VA itself is the appellate process, that although everything else had improved and had caught up with technology, our appeals process really hadn't changed in over 80 years. So the Appeals Modernization Act that was passed in August is the first real reform that we've had in the appellate process in that time frame. So we're pretty excited about it. I think we needed to do a little better job, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it a little bit, about getting the word out about what it is, and the RAMP program while we wait on
explain the RAMP program, because I know the Secretary touched on it. So for those who either interface with the regional office or just perhaps for our own knowledge, explain a little bit more about the RAMP.
Absolutely. So the RAMP program is an attempt to address those almost 470,000 veterans still in the appellate process while we wait to implement the new act, which will be implemented in February 2019. The RAMP program started in November, and as Mr. Bowman mentioned, it's targeting those who have waited longest in the appellate process. We sent out 500 RAMP letters in November and have subsequently sent more and more. Total through January was 15,000 letters, 2,200 for veterans in the state of Florida. Unfortunately, because we really didn't know enough about it, or we didn't share either with the veteran community or our veteran service officer partners what it was, people were afraid to lose their place in line. So they really didn't take advantage of the opportunity to opt into these two new lanes that he had mentioned. So we're doing a little bit better, hopefully a better job of communicating that. And if you take nothing away from me tonight, that if you have a RAMP letter in front of you, or if you don't know what it is, come talk to me. I'll let you know what that is. But if you get that opportunity to opt into the new program, it will go much, much faster, and you will not lose your place in line. But that said, if 470,000 letters went out, obviously, if everything was a priority, nothing is. So we're ramping the ramp, so to speak, and we're sending more and more letters each month. In February, we're sending out 25,000 letters to veterans across the country in hopes to get them to opt into the program. Right now, those are not being processed at the regional office level. They're being processed at our appeals management office in Washington, D.C., and we have other regional offices with capacity in the appeals area to address as we get more and more claims coming in through the RAMP process. So we have a strategic plan in place to cover those veterans as they come in. And hopefully we'll be on that. But right now, we have almost 28,000 veterans in the state of Florida within that 470,000 populace for appeals.
Very good. We touched on the healthcare administration. We touched on benefits. Another piece of the Secretary's presentation this evening was the transition from active duty. And I'm curious, Captain Villa, if you could give us a little bit of perspective through a wider lens of perhaps what you see on the active duty, on the battlefield transitioning to VA, transitioning to private life, and perhaps on the issue of PTSD and suicides and so forth. I mean, there's not a clear break point when you move to the VA. Some of those PTS challenges exist before leaving and carry forward. How would you define some of the challenges with the transition and recommendations?
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to stop at the challenges. You know, I had the privilege of serving as a commanding officer of a Role 3, basically for those that remember Vietnam, a MASH hospital in Kandahar, Afghanistan, 2009 to 2010. And when my task force medical commander came down, he was changing over, I was staying, and the new one asked me, he said, "Darren, what keeps you up at night? What scares you?" It was kind of ironic because I think he wanted me to say this lack of medication or that lack of support capability. And I just sent 230 sailors on a plane back home. And you've heard it touched on here today, but that's what scared me. And what scared me, and you said it yourself, they were leaving that support mechanism and they were going back to, in many cases, particularly for our reserves and National Guard, a very disjointed system. The second thing that's kind of been touched on here that I would say is true again today, you know, well, I'll phrase it first. I said, I used to send my sailors out from the hospital and I'd tell them, no one goes downrange without changing. It will change you. Matter of fact, my executive officer, who was a Canadian, wrote a book called Warrior Rising, which is his experience with PTSD. I didn't pick up on it. I can tell you I read that book with a heavy heart because Chris hid it from me the whole time we were there. He had been in Rwanda, experienced the tragedies in Rwanda with the Canadian Armed Forces, and then relived that when he went back. Just today, I had a surgeon who's requesting a waiver, who is going back to be the trauma surgeon in Bagram, who has PTSD, suicidal ideations, and alcohol abuse. It exists and it has affected our entire spectrum. What are the greatest challenges? I think, again, that disjointedness. I want to paraphrase it with, I think the intent is good, but we have a lot of programs that we have not successfully brought together as well as we should, and it seems very chaotic to me when you leave DOD, and part of this is on us too. But when you leave DOD, it seems like the programs are very chaotic and not as standardized or not as cohesive and implemented, and I hope the policy that comes out starts to address that. But to me, the risks are real, the risks are there, everyone in the room knows what those risks are, but I think that is the greatest risk and the challenge as you transition from DOD to VA, is ensuring that there's a cohesive program there to support you.
Very good. Before going to General Steele, because very shortly we're going to open it up to questions. So if you do have a card, please just raise it. Somebody will come get it. If you are looking for one, perhaps just raise your hand. But let's go to Lieutenant General Steele. You were a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission on Care, which produced 18, I believe, recommendations. Choose two. Share with us a little bit of the highlights. It can be 2 or 3, but what were some of the core things on how to organize and provide for the next generation of delivery of care? What's your takeaway?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here, and I was privileged to be on the 15-member Commission on Care, which met in 2015, and we gave our report to the President of the United States and the Congress in 2016. And we did make 18 recommendations. We spent a lot of time studying a 4,000-page document by Rand and Miter Corporation, which was looking at the VA and all of its strengths and weaknesses. And they had, in 4,000 pages, a lot of different opinions. And what our task was to review that document and then look at what are the potentials for the future of VA healthcare in the next 20 years. And as Secretary Bowman said, we were accused of privatization, we were accused of no change. So what we did was look at, and I'm so thrilled to hear Secretary Bowman's comments tonight. He mentioned 5 of our 18 recommendations that are part of the legislation that is currently working its way or having been passed. But for me, it was about, and I'll just speak to a couple of points, Congressman Jolly, the issue over community-based care and the words that the Secretary used in his remarks, the vetting that needs to go through on the primary caregiver inside the VA and the collaborative requirement of community
care providers, that they needed to have an understanding of the culture of the military. They needed to have an understanding of the needs, particularly in the mental health arena, and that collaborative requirement with the VA really was going to provide us with an ability to expand the scope and ability of the VA, because, as the Secretary said, it's just not big enough to be able to handle all of this. And as the captain just indicated, I think that the deluge is coming still, the 2.3+ million people that have served since 9/11, and the issues that they're experiencing that haven't come to the fore yet in regards to the mental health arena. We need to be prepared to be able to do that, and we need to provide quality providers in the community to be able to collaborate with the VA to ensure that care. The other issue for me as a member of the commission is that was not mentioned by the Secretary, but he and I have had the privilege to speak about this at length, is the internal leadership issue of the VA and growing their own and creating a capability set for developing leaders inside the VA and having succession planning inside the VA and having standards inside the VA. Part of the 4,000-page report, which we inherited, and part of our assessment of the situation was we had these pockets of excellence that existed in the VA, and I would submit, without embarrassing anyone here, this area, particularly Bay Pines, the Bill Young VA Medical Center, and James Haley over in Tampa are shining stars in those pockets of excellence in VA care. I mean, they all have issues, but they are pockets of excellence in VA care. However, the standards that they meet here and exceed here, and the methodologies that they use because of their leaders, are not pervasive throughout the system of the VA. And so what our commission was looking at was, how do we incorporate those standards of those tremendous performers and get them pervasive throughout the system and ensure that we don't have failing performers. We don't have these issues wherein, particularly in rural areas throughout the country, our veterans are not getting the quality care that they deserve, whether it be on a timely basis, whether it be access to care, or whether it just be treatment, that it's not the quality that they deserve. So we spent a tremendous amount of time. There are 5 of the 18 recommendations in the leadership area that Secretary Shulkin is looking at, as is Secretary Bowman and the leadership of the VA, of how they can incorporate those recommendations to create this continuum inside the VA leadership development effort to ensure that it is self-sustaining over the next 20 years, to ensure that we have a viable enterprise in ensuring that we're taking care of our selfless servants who preserve our way of life in this country.
Very good. Mr. Secretary, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of comment on a lot of these items, but perhaps the very first one from the general there. You mentioned in your remarks that the expansion of care coordination is not simply a card, that would be too elusive and too hard perhaps to get your hands around. What will it look like? What will the expansion of care coordination look like within the community?
The approach that's going to be taken as defined, and I'm only using what is the bill that I know that is going to be moving somewhat quickly, and it may also exist on the House side, is that you're going to see an approach that allows for providers in the community to be identified, that are willing to accept the payment that the VA is willing to, and capable of providing under the legislation. And then once they agree, you're going to have a provider network that we have an obligation on the VA side, that when a provider in the community says they wish to participate and take care of veterans, that we guarantee that provider the ability to have their payment in a timely fashion. We have found that that has been one of the most significant drawbacks when you look at trying to satisfy the desire of these providers to take care of veterans. They feel that they want to do that as a way of giving back, but they at the same time have their own practice. So I think what you're going to find, when the legislation passes, there'll be a year, almost a year, before we're actually going to be able to implement what are the intended processes. But the process will be, if a individual, a veteran, you know, that veteran may live just 5 miles, let's say, from Bay Pines, but that veteran may be a caregiver to his or her spouse. That veteran may have a certain condition that they can't drive after, after it gets dark. And so in a winter environment, somebody may be, driving at 4 or 5 o'clock and it's getting dark. The veteran is going to be able to present a condition or a circumstance where it's just reasonable to say that that individual's care should be provided in the community closest, especially if there is a provider close by that can provide the care, and that individual doesn't have to come. But at the same time, the goal is to see that VA medical centers become centers of excellence for as many of the conditions and capabilities that we can, because we want to have a VA. We want to have VA infrastructure that is modern and capable of taking care of veterans. I get my care at VA when I'm down here. More often than not, the comments are positive comments about the experience there. I've had some serious surgeries. I had some less serious. But they, overall, I mean, I blend with, just like any other veteran, I'm very satisfied. I trust the care. I have experience. I've had some bad experience, none under Wally Hopkins' leadership, I'll say that. But I think what you'll find is there's going to be an approach where there's going to be a communication out to veterans so they'll understand what they are able to choose from. But there's going to be 2 goals: to understand what is available to them in the community, but then also a goal of choosing VA, because there are any number of veterans who are willing to drive 10, 15, 20 miles to get their care at VA because they like the provider, they feel that they're being taken care of well, and they trust what they get.
Very good. Any other items from the panel discussion?
Yes, on the ramp, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know what the percentage is down here. One of the things when the ramp program, the letters started going out, the big term in Washington is, what is the take rate? In other words, how many veterans actually took advantage of the ramp, sent in their claim, and then what was the result? What we have found, at least in the initial analysis of, let's say, a 3 to 5% take rate, so it's not a great, census group, but 65% found that their claim was adjudicated favorably, when I think most of the time it's about 30 or 35%, or even less, depending upon what is the particular condition that may be being looked at. So what we need to do is to kind of hopefully see that this information gets out where a veteran is willing to consider the ramp as a way of getting the claim considered and decided in a more timely manner, especially those who have been sitting out there for 3, 4, 5 years.
And it was ramp that you mentioned the importance of working through a VSO, or working with it.
Working through a VSO, because the VSO will be able to advise and ensure and then follow up on behalf of the veteran. The other thing was the TAP program. As the Deputy Secretary, I serve as the co-chair of what is called the JEC, the Joint Executive Committee. And that entity has a HEC, a Health Executive Committee subcommittee, and a BEC, a Benefits subcommittee. We're great on acronyms. I mean, DOD, okay, but VA, we beat DOD. So, but the JEC, the purpose of the JEC is to take issues of collaboration between DOD and VA and see how we may be able to address the problems dramatically across both departments. And the idea of transition and coming up with ways that the needs of the individual leaving active duty are blended with a warm handoff to the VA in ensuring that that transition is beneficial to the veteran. What has been identified is the issue of mental health and its implications if that handoff is as scraggly as it has been. And I mean, both DOD and VA says we don't do it like we need to do it. And that's the purpose for the executive order. There's been a directive that DOD and VA, I'm putting it simply, are going to have to sit down and they're going to come up and address the problems. And that's what's going on the study side right now. So I do think you're going to see an easier, beneficial, more timely transition. The other comment is succession planning. The general is spot on. I can tell you right now, VA as an enterprise across the country, our hospitals do not have a deep bench because we haven't had overall, in my opinion, a continuous focus on the training and the education and the recruiting to bring people in who we want to stay. If we have young, just really promising leaders within our current VA structure, we need to approach keeping them within the VA so they don't look going out. And that's compensation, it's education, it's an awards and recognition program to let them know that veterans are happy with their care and their service, and that leadership is also. Secretary Shulkin has as one of his initiatives, and it's being looked at right now, is the issue of succession planning to keep our talent and our dedicated employees within VA, but recruit from the private sector to bring more in.
That's very good. Do we have the question cards? Yes, yes, sir.
I just want to say one thing, if you don't mind. I think it's important to emphasize quality of care. And access to care is very important. That's why the choice mandate is there, and I believe it 100%. But I can tell you as a psychiatrist, the quality of care provided in mental health in the community is substandard compared to VA. They don't have the rigorous performance measures. They don't have the evidence-based treatments that we have. So there are certain things the VA does better. And I am not talking about dental work, for example, or podiatry, or things that the community may do as well or better than the VA. But we have expertise, not because we wanted to have expertise, it's because the service members came with post-traumatic stress disorder and complications of mental health conditions from active duty. We have expertise. We've developed expertise over the many, many years, and then developed evidence-based treatments to address these kinds of conditions. The community, most of the community, are not enriched with those kinds of knowledge. So I want to make sure that we don't minimize the quality of care provided in VA in certain conditions compared to community. As a matter of fact, there are studies that suggest that VA care in terms of psychotropic medication monitoring is much better and higher than the community. So that doesn't mean that every VA provider has the wonderful high standard, but in general, we are providing better care in VA for mental health conditions. I just want to plug that in because I am overseeing mental health and behavioral sciences.
Okay, let me do a double plug. Okay. I think when you see the legislation, there's going to be a set of provisions in the legislation that will look at addressing that specific issue, that if providers are going to be recruited to participate in the community care network, that they are going to have to be able to demonstrate a quality satisfaction, or VA won't, allow them to begin to participate. Now, will it be as rigorous as what you may have if you have personnel on staff like you have on campus at a VA medical center? I don't know. We're going to have to see how it ultimately plays itself out. But I think your point is well taken, and it has been recognized, and it's part of the legislation. Because VA does it so well, it is part of what is hopefully going to be implemented when the community care network is ultimately developed. So it's a choose VA issue.
So we have several questions. A lot of them have overlap, but there are several questions about the choice program. what's working, what perhaps hasn't worked as effectively as anticipated. Everything from the delay in providers being paid to providers then perhaps being discouraged from taking VA patients. Do you have any comment on, say, the implementation of it, areas for improvement where you've seen improvement, or where legislation can help? And I throw that to the whole panel. You get to deputize whoever you want to answer that.
The only point that I'll make as kind of an introduction to a larger, more detailed answer is that currently we have about 7 funding streams that identify and provide care in the community. And those funding streams, the way it's been set up, is the funds can only be used to support certain types of programs of care. P3C, the choice program can't be used to, pay for care that isn't acknowledged to fall under the choice program. So what this new legislation will do, no matter which House or Senate blend ultimately comes out, they're going to collapse those 7 streams into one principal account to allow access by the medical center director to manage the total assets that are provided and given to him or her, to use those assets in the community to determine and to provide the care as they see necessary in that particular community. The flexibility to be able to support the needs as identified by the director. One kind of a sidebar comment, the philosophy that Dr. Shulkin has is less decided in Washington, more decided and implemented in the community. And by in the community, I mean down at the medical center level and the VISN level. So if you're going to hold medical centers accountable for the quality of their care, then you've got to give them the ability to manage and make decisions that they think are most appropriate. The fact that somebody else may disagree, fine. But the flexibility is, I want directors, medical center directors, and VISN directors to make good choices as they see the need within their particular jurisdiction. So I think you're going to see more of that.
And notwithstanding, and Suzanne, I'd love you to follow up on this. So notwithstanding the reimbursement issue, which is an administrative issue that any organization could improve on, whether VA or non-VA, a lot of the constraints were implemented by Congress. While it's called a choice program, there actually were constraints in terms of mileage and whether or not services could be provided within the VA. And so if there is an intrinsic, not bias, but predisposition within the law that if the VA can provide the service, the VA should provide it internally. That is one of the constraints of the choice program for the VA, because you simply can't send everybody out. Is that an accurate statement? Is that inaccurate?
Well, the Veterans Choice Program was instituted to give veterans more options of access, and I believe that it's been effective in doing so, and we have, as an organization, improved upon that in the past months. I'll give you some examples. At the Bay Pines VA Healthcare System in fiscal year 2017, we authorized about 15,000 episodes of care in the community. Now, also keep in mind that for a very long time, VA has authorized care in the community through what we now call VA Community Care Service, what was previously called non-VA care, and what was before that called fee basis, that someone might be feed out into the community, for example. And we still use that opportunity every day as well. One thing that's been of benefit to us at Bay Pines is the third-party administrator HealthNet has a staff member embedded with our team at the Largo business office, and so we're interacting with that individual routinely to address veterans' waits as well as to address provider relations. So that's been very effective. Another piece of it, because it was a new law and a new practice to be implemented very quickly, was to educate and share information with our veteran service organization partners and with veterans. And we've really tried to be out in front at Bay Pines in educating and building awareness about the choice program and what's also available through our traditional VA community care service. In fiscal year 2017, Bay Pines delivered on about 1.5 million outpatient visits. 98% of those were within 30 days of the patient's indicated date. And so that's better than the national average, and we're working every day to continue to improve upon that. Many of our services are available same day. Primary care, if a veteran is in need of an appointment or a walk-in, they are able to do that at our main campus, the C.W. Bill Young VA Medical Center, or at any of our community-based outpatient clinics. That includes veterans who are traveling and vacationing or staying in our area for only a portion of the year. They may not be a regular patient enrolled with our healthcare system, but we can meet their need that same day if it's urgently needed. Mental health services are available same day at our main campus and across our healthcare system. And it's wonderful as I sit with the medical support assistants who conduct the scheduling across the healthcare system to see that warm handoff in what we call primary care mental health integration, so that a veteran coming in for a primary care appointment that may have a mental health concern surface during that visit can be a very warm handoff to mental health professionals to have that need met that very same day. At our main campus, we also have cardiology available the same day. So if a veteran has an appointment with a primary care provider today, and there's a heart condition or concern that's realized, they will see, if they are able to stay for that, a cardiologist today. And that avoids unnecessary testing for the veteran and is able to, we think, more timely address their healthcare needs. And certainly, when you hear something maybe of concern with your heart, you want to know. But we have other programs that we've worked to improve access internally to as well, and that includes our audiology walk-in clinics across the healthcare system and chiropractic care. So we're doing some really neat things in terms of access for veterans, and as Mr. Bowman indicated, Choose VA is a very definite theme for us, and we're working to improve access across our healthcare system while recognizing the importance of choice in the community.
And so I presume the secretary could have a same-day flu shot if he chose to do so.
Yes, he could.
Let me ask you.
That's why it was offered.
A question as a follow-up, because it's something you mentioned, a very specific question from an attendee this evening. Why not combine vet choice with the fee-based program to simplify?
Well, I would suggest that's probably a legislative solution.
Right.
But
there's a constraint, right? Congress has put a constraint on VA doing that.
But in reality, right? as we are implementing it within our healthcare system, it is our same staff, our VA community care staff, who are acting upon the requests of the patients and the physicians throughout our healthcare system in coordinating that care in the community, whether it be choice or through our traditional, what we previously referred to as fee.
Very good. There's also a question interested in more information about the CARE program, and I know legislatively there are some decisions to be made, but the individual says, I'm a service-connected vet, 10% Social Security, disability, I have to see a doctor on the outside of the VA. Is the CARE program possibly going to open up more opportunities for this individual?
To be honest with you, I can't answer the specifics of that question, but I do think that it is worth, and I'll take it back with me, it is worth looking at to see whether or not the current wording of the legislation would allow for that. To be honest with you, I don't know. I'd have to get with our community care experts, subject matter experts, and see whether or not that would be capable of interpretation to merge the benefit.
I know the VA works closely with the Congress on major comprehensive legislation. Are there any concerns that Secretary Shulkin or the Trump administration or yourself have with specific provisions that are being considered on the Hill that perhaps the attendees this evening would be interested in knowing?
As it relates to CARE?
care or any other initiatives that Congress is looking at as part of the comprehensive change?
Another big provision that is in the Senate legislation is the caregiver program. That currently, post 9/11 veterans who need caregiver, there is an established program for providing that care, to include compensation in a manner for the caregiver. That doesn't exist for pre-9/11. And it has been a desire on the part of the veteran service organizations, and I have to say Senator Murray and Chairman Isaacson have had that as a priority. All the senators have it as a priority, but I do have to give a shout out to Senator Murray. She has been consistently arguing for caregiver legislation. However, that the caregiver legislation right now, they have activities of daily living that help determine whether or not an individual becomes eligible. Could be combing your hair, can you get up and move about. To open up caregiver legislation right now with one ADL is going to be an expensive proposition. It is currently in the Senate bill. Whether it would survive coming out of a conference committee at the same level, I don't know. So there may be, much like it exists in other healthcare systems, maybe 3 ADLs would be a way to use as a way of identifying who is most appropriate for that type of care. So there are pieces of the legislation that are of need, but they may not be able to be affordable in light of the total picture of the legislation that we want to be able to see. But I do think that you will see pre-9/11 caregiver legislation in some manner or form of what ultimately is approved.
Very good. Another question, what is the user status of the My Health Vet program where the vet can access his or her records online?
I know I access mine, but I'm going to look to my medical center director for a complete answer.
All right.
We have about 55,000 of our approximate 110,000 veteran users who are accessing My Healthy Vet secure messaging to your healthcare teams, or receiving clinical video telehealth care, store and forward photography of dermatology or retina, and having it reviewed by a physician who is not at that clinic. So we're really trying to expand the use of those modalities. It's been a big success.
Is there a point of entry for questions? If a veteran had a question, where do they direct that?
A veteran can look on our website if they'd like, and they can come into our clinics and become what's called authenticated, to be able to use that way of communicating with a provider team.
Okay. Staying on the IT piece for just a little bit, and this is going to tax my knowledge, but part of your presentation was you had optimism about Cerner and suggested we keep an eye on what comes as a result of that. Can you explain that a little bit further in lay terms for us?
The Cerner contract, we take a step back. Cerner is already providing essentially the management of the electronic health record and the record system for DoD. So we have the benefit of their 4.5 years of experience, the problems that they have experienced as to how to manage and exchange information. The points of care that DoD has are less than what VA has. So we have a scalability problem that, not a problem, it's a challenge that is going to be part of how we look at implementing a Cerner collaboration with what DoD has as Cerner. We have a different approach to how we want to have healthcare records managed, but I think the bottom line is that from an IT perspective, the programs, the technology, the capability is going to, on VA's part, is going to be able to handle what we need what is going to be the first 2 to 3 years is as you begin to merge what we have as our needs with what DOD has as their capability, and then make the two work. And then at the same time, you're reaching over here outside of DOD and VA into the private sector to ensure the ability of interaction and capability to transfer that information in for those who are seeking care, outside of VA.
I see Captain Villa and the General making notes. So I want to come to you, but maybe just if you could explain a little bit further, because to me it's analogous. In my time in Congress, it was the scheduling system and the investment made in developing a new scheduling system. And there was an organizational internal debate over whether to go proprietary or off the shelf, how much money to spend on it. I mean, you can always buy the Cadillac, but perhaps you don't need the Cadillac. Is Cerner a program that is simplifying the process kind of in a standards-based program, or is it a proprietary one that?
Cerner will ultimately, when we are able to activate it, will have a scheduling component as part of it.
Okay. Captain Villa, General, you're the only two people I saw making notes about IT, so I feel like we've got to go to you on this one.
Notes down here, Congressman.
So, Secretary, my comments would be I would just really want to look back at that 4.5 years of implementation that you're discussing. To my knowledge, we have currently implemented it in 3 small clinics up in the Pacific Northwest, and it was recently pushed back by 3 months for implementation at the first medical center, so a tertiary care center. Darren Vai's opinion, not the opinion of DOD. It is, in my opinion, not a successful launch. It is being pushed back for patient safety reasons due to latency in the architecture of the capability. I think DOD is going to struggle with implementation, and I fear that, therefore, the VA will follow on with that struggle because, as you said, it is a much greater requirement even than we have.
That is part of the challenge.
Yes, sir.
That the Secretary looked at when he made a decision as to, one, going with one health record and Cerner being the platform. There could have been other approaches to utilizing other platforms, but then there would be a greater challenge as to whether or not they were going to be interoperable with what DOD had. I think from a philosophy standpoint, the closer that we could be with where, quote unquote, DOD is, then we would be able to maximize the benefit of whatever problems you were experiencing. I'm optimistic. I'm looking at a guess time frame of we're going to be able to throw the switch maybe in 7, maybe 8 years. There are going to be some struggling and some challenges, but we're going to get there. And when we're there, I truly believe part of the overall objective is to have that as a frame of reference and experiencing interoperable electronic health record that then can be translated out into the private sector if it's working.
Sir, where I would not lose some confidence, though, and again, I think most should know this. Again, I came from the Tidewater area, which was one of the first implementations of VELR, which was a DOD VA sharing agreement. And when I started, it was names and social security numbers that could be shared. Leaving there 2 years ago, actually, it was full medical records accessible back and forth. And again, the largest private provider there is Centera. Yeah. And actually, we were sharing records with Centera too. So, my other fear would be in the wait for the Cerner product. As you know, a lot of times, once a new solution has been found, O&M operations and maintenance costs for current programs start to dry up. Right. And I would hate to see all of the great capabilities that we have piecemealed together to be lost in that, what I predict to be a long transition phase.
The benefit that I think VA has is the fact that we have a physician who still practices medicine, for a period of time each month to, stay involved and stay aware. He's talked about that issue as something that he keeps to the forefront of his mind because he wants to make sure that it's addressed in each and every strategic discussion we have with Cerner. and then as we expand it with whomever else is going to become involved. But I share your concern, but my optimism overrides it, so.
We've got, yeah, sure, General, you bet.
Obviously, in the Commission on Care, one of the 18 recommendations was to do exactly as is being planned in the legislation. This is a hotly contested issue, both in the 4,000-page report and then during our deliberations. We brought in people from all throughout the VA, the Department of Defense, private sector, the cost of the enterprise. Remember, we're looking at it for the next 20 years, the legacy system inside the VA. Our belief, firm belief, and the firm recommendation that we made was the direction that the VA is going now. Will there be hiccups? Yes. I mean, we were just trying to get DOD and VA to communicate with one another because that was what was directed by the Congress, and there were issues with that. Couldn't get them to do that very effectively. So I'm with Secretary Bowman about this. I think that 7 years, I think he's pretty optimistic, but the point is that the legacy system, we believe, needed to be jettisoned over time and to get it all cohesively together. And we had some tremendous subject matter experts, and the VA and Secretary Shulkin and Secretary Bowman have hired people to come into the VA with talent and expertise in this area that I believe will help carry the day to be able to implement this. The cost estimated today at X billions of dollars, I think, will go up, and that's part of the business in the IT world. But I just hate to see us keep band-aiding legacy systems that I don't believe will stand the test of time, nor are they sustainable. So we made that recommendation after a lot of deliberations.
All right. So we have just about 5 or 10 minutes. These are going to be a little bit of lightning round. We can't get to all the questions, but there are some very specific questions, some very specific cases. I've tried to pull out the ones that I think could inform perhaps the broadest audience. On scheduling, on the practical side of it, can scheduling at clinics be changed so the veteran sees the same physician or medical practitioner each visit?
Well, that's certainly our intent in the primary care and mental health arenas for certain. When you're accessing specialties and subspecialties, it may not be the case depending on how long in between your visits or your need might be. We do, though, make every effort to have a provider step in and meet your need. If you have a scheduled appointment today and your physician may have called out or be unexpectedly away. So although we try and call the patients first to let them know of that change and if they prefer to reschedule, but it is our intent that you see the same physician for primary care and mental health and specialties as can be.
All right. For Secretary Bowman, is there an update on the consolidation of Florida under Vision 8?
That's one of my passions, as Nevin Weaver knows. That I think you're talking about the Panhandle
Right,
area.
the Vision 8 and Vision 16 and
Yeah. I just think it's a no-brainer, common sense, that bit of territory should be within Vision 8. Now, when it was ultimately, when the Vision structure was created and there were determinations as to where the lines of jurisdiction for which Vision, it was done based upon assessments and studies as to what were the populations that could be served in the better way. And it was a decision that was made. It took a piece of Florida and put it over essentially in Vision 16. My time in Vision 8, I always saw that as a problem. The veterans up there and the veterans advocates always saw it as a problem because they'd much prefer to be treated by VA in Florida. Now that may be, loyalty to Florida as part of the driver, and I'm there with them. So for whatever period of time that I have as the Deputy Secretary, I'm hoping that one day when I come back, I'm going to be able to indicate that we're successful, that we got all of Florida in Florida.
There are a number of questions about benefit qualifications, and each one presents a different fact pattern. I know many veterans have interfaced with the regional office and understand the process, but for those who really have just hit a wall and feel as though their case is not being heard, what's your advice, Juliana?
Obviously, come see us. We have benefits counselors that can talk to you at the regional office. You can.
The mic.
I'm sorry. You can come see us, obviously, to talk about your case or your claim, and we can walk you through the process. If that's not been satisfactory, you can also check our website. We have many veteran service organizations that partner with us out within the counties as well as in the regional office with us. You can call me or email me. I'd be glad to try to help you in any way I can, or come see me afterwards if you're one of those that wrote the particular claim. But it's a complex process, and I can understand how if you don't understand the process, or if you don't feel like you have an advocate for you on your side, how frustrating it can be. So we're willing to try to simplify the process the best we can and give that explanation and walk you through it. And the biggest thing is to know what to expect.
Okay. A very important question about spousal abuse, either male or female. What services are available to help an abused spouse through the VA?
Certainly when a spouse, in conjunction with a veteran, reports during treatment that is going on, we address it. I think the problem has been that the spouses are not speaking out, and the veteran does not share sometimes when that is happening. Our regional counseling centers have significant expertise in addressing spousal abuse and domestic violence, and they are collaborating with us in VA to really as a resource for these families. But I think the barrier is that people are not speaking up for fear of repercussion, and that's unfortunate. We're there to help. We never turn anybody away. As a clinician, my job is to treat and improve quality of care and quality of life. So I don't turn anybody away. When I realize that is going on, we have family therapists, we have licensed marital and family therapists in VA and in my service that will address that effectively.
A final benefits question, Mr. Secretary, probably for you, the status of claims for Camp Lejeune vets.
My understanding is that we're obviously individuals who find themselves on the registry are continuously being tracked. From the standpoint of any veteran who has identified himself as falling within the window of time as being eligible, those individuals have claims that are being processed, and then they are in essence in the system like any other veteran. I think where the challenge now is as it relates to what may have been family members, and then how that care is going to be provided and taken care of from the standpoint of programs and funding. I don't think that we are able to provide the complete solution that anybody who was there, family or otherwise, are being cared for completely or having their issues addressed completely, but we're working in that direction. The veteran, I think that aspect is pretty well being taken care of if they demonstrate they were there and they have the conditions. It's the family members and then the ability to fund the care that's going to be necessary. So is there more work to be done to support the Camp Lejeune toxic victims? The answer is yes.
Okay. So the last two questions, and I'm going to ask the second to last question and give you time to find the answer. We got it from about 10 people. Then we'll move to the last question. Several requests to repeat the White House phone number. If you know it by heart, if not, let's look for it. Here's the other question that I will ask as we find the White House number, whoever has it in their notes. How can community groups or individuals in the community, those here tonight who perhaps didn't serve but have a heart of service to the veterans, how can they either help identify veterans to help themselves, or how can they identify organizations, or what opportunities might there be at VA for community volunteers and community advocates to give back to those who have given so much to us?
That's a great question, thank you. And all of you have talents that can make a difference in the lives of veterans and their families. And we invite you to volunteer with us at Bay Pines or at any of our community-based outpatient clinics. In fact, we have the largest volunteer program across the state of Florida in VA through our healthcare system. We also are fortunate to have an organization that was formed a couple of years ago called the Bay Pines St. Petersburg My VA Community Engagement Board. And Brett Miller, our chairperson, is here this evening. And
Brett, you want to raise your hand?
Father Bob Swick was our first chairperson, and they just recently transitioned their leadership roles. And they're focused specifically at Pinellas County and ensuring that we're meeting together collectively as a community the needs and expectations of veterans. Not only healthcare and benefits and memorial affairs, but other needs. And they're doing a remarkable job. And so I would encourage looking at the Pinellas County Resource Guide that's been published within the past year, and engage with us on our website as well. We're very happy to come out and participate in outreach events and public speaking to help spread the news about VA and what services are available to veterans and their families.
What one point of entry would you offer for a new volunteer? Who do they call?
We have a voluntary service office at the hospital.
Okay.
That can do that, or to look on our website and contact us through our website.
Very good. And Mr. Secretary, you have a phone number to share.
I do. 855-948-2311. And I'll say it again. 855-948-2311. And I do have a leadership update that I can share with attendees. So if you don't know, we do not have permanent undersecretaries for benefit or an undersecretary for health. When Secretary Shulkin was elevated and asked to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, it created a vacancy. And there's an established legislative process as to how their replacements will be identified. And a couple months ago, we had a commission, an Undersecretary for Benefits Search Commission. Aileen Tarter was invited to be a member of that. At my request, she, graciously said she would participate. And the purpose of that is to receive resumes, bios of individuals who think that they would like to assume and if selected and confirmed by the Senate the ability to act in the status of an Undersecretary for Benefits. We went through a review of those who had identified. We found 3 names that seemed to be very highly qualified. They were sent over to the White House. The White House vetted them, and I do think that very shortly we're going to have a name, an announcement of intent to nominate an individual that came from that commission. I very proudly was the chairman of that commission. Just last week, we had the Undersecretary for Health Commission. It was the 3rd iteration where the earlier commission and the individuals identified there. The White House just chose, for their own reasons, I never try to second guess the White House, but they chose not to bring forward any of those names, so we had a commission just last week. Nevin Weaver was invited to participate as a member of the commission, and we identified 3 names. Those 3 names are now with the Secretary. He'll interview them, and if he agrees, those names will be sent over to the White House to be vetted. And if things were to move, without any significant problems, we could have an Undersecretary for Health, probably by late May, and then, be able to have somebody to perform that role in a permanent fashion, capable of making the kinds of decisions for long-term operational capability that an acting secretary just is not able to make. So I think hopefully by May, I'm kind of pushing May, we're going to have benefits, and hopefully we'll have a undersecretary for health also. So that's kind of an update, leadership update.
Very good. David Clement's going to come and close us out, but folks, please express your gratitude to Lieutenant General Martin Steele, Captain Darren Villa, Father Bob Swick, Director Juliana Bohr, Dr. Alfonso Carina, Director Klinker, and of course, Deputy Secretary of the Veteran Affairs Administration, Thomas Brown.
And we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the work of the moderator. We thank Mr. Jolly. And Mr. Bowman, let me add my thanks to you and your staff for helping put this on. They've been very helpful throughout these last few weeks to get everything in place for this. And the panel, my thanks to you personally also. I think this has been helpful. It's given us more insight into the complexities of the problems, challenges facing the VA, and its effort to to meet those challenges and provide the services that we have promised our veterans. Before we adjourn, I would like to just call your attention to the next program the Institute is putting on March 27th. Over in the Library Conference Center, we're going to be addressing the issue of cybersecurity and hacking. We all know something about that, but maybe we don't know very much beyond our fear that we're going to be hacked and our ID stolen. Well, this panel and this speaker will give us some insights that will give us a deeper understanding of that issue. So please consider registering. It is a dinner, so there's a charge for the food. That's all for tonight. Thank you very much, and a safe journey home to everyone.